So hello everyone, and we are now continuing our classes theft about Noahide, commandment number 4, theft, talking about the generations between Noah and Abraham. Okay, we started last week by the Babylonian tower, the ascent of Nimrod to power by his skill of communication, and finally the tower was toppled by God, specifically by Hashem, because of it became heartless and merciless. People were crying more for the fallen brick than from the fallen comrade on the ground. As a result of all that, Hashem dispersed them, destroyed the tower, and they were dispersed all over the world, speaking different language. So now let's continue with the story, and we need to find out today. Our goal is to see what is special about Abraham that was not in Noah. That's if it gets there, I know that we did our job. So after the fall of the Tower of Babel, the people dispersed all over earth, speaking different languages, having no more sense of brotherhood. Remember, Tower under Nimrod, they all came with a big sense of brotherhood, speaking one language, having one faith. Now it's gone. The new leaders of humanity and the new nations, leader of new nations, each one tried to emulate the King Nimrod's success and build their own social tower of dictatorship, where a few elites sit at the top, controlling subordinates and masses of people underneath. But there was a difference, whereas in Nimrod's tower and his social hierarchy, people flocked on their own and did some voluntary work on their own, volunteering, being attracted to the project by the thrill to be joined a big organization. They got rank, they got names, they love it. And it supplied what they wanted. But the new leaders trying to emulate Nimrod, they based their own new towers, of social tower, on oppressive armed force. First oppressing their own people, then invading other nations to conquer their territories, capturing their inhabitants for slavery and forced labor, and having taxes on the subdued nations. This is the society that Abraham was born into. Now, during the 10th generation between Noah and Abraham, a new way of accumulating wealth was introduced to the world, namely erecting empires. In other words, theft was conducted now not on an individual level as in Noah's time by gangs, but now by the large scale, by armies, invading other nations' border and capturing territories and manpower. So this game of accumulating wealth was the passion of the day. You see it in the story of Abraham as 4 kings of the north, coming all the way to the 5 kings of the south to subdue them and to levy taxes on them. So 10 generations after Noah, when Abraham was born, humanity actually forgot Noah's tradition. He was still alive, but he was old and obsolete. No one remembers teaching anymore. And the generation was plagued with idolatry, adultery, bloodshed, and as we just said, theft on a large scale unknown before. So Abraham, what about Abraham? He was born into a pagan family. And his father, Terach, was not only idolater, but he was a priest of idolatry who made his living by carving out wood statues and idols and selling them in a store. As a young boy, tradition says, Abraham helped his father in a store. But instead of complying with the norm, like anyone else, Abraham's sensitive soul caused him to stand against his father and against the general trend and of theft, organized theft. And there was a drastic step that caused him to lose his homeland and driven out into exile. Now, I described to you in short, what the Torah says about those generations between Noah and Abraham in short term. But the question is, how accurate is this description of Moses? After all, Moses lived in 1450 BC, and he described society the 1,000 years before him. How accurate is this description? He grew up in Pharaoh's home. There is no record in Pharaoh's home that we know today that carried the history of Babylon or Mesopotamia. In fact, they didn't write any history. Excuse me. Each king just wrote a few inscriptions on the wall, glorifying himself. But there was no sense of history. But here Moses writes a good piece of history of 1,000 years before him. How accurate could it be? So for that, let us read Karen Armstrong's book called Field of Blood, published in 2014, where she described that period of human history, and her description, of course, is based on archaeology and finding without any reference to the Bible. She is not aware, so what she writes concur or not with the Bible. She just writes history, period, based on archaeology. So this is her account is the best objective description of Abraham's society. So let's see what she writes. And I quote to you. The world's first civilization was a federation of city-state in Mesopotamia, today Iraq. This fertile land was first settled in massive way around 4400 BC. The settlers dig irrigation canals and ditches between the Tigris and Euphrates River and use bricks for their homes, city wall and tower. They used bricks. Remember the Torah described Nimrod Tower, and they found strong bricks. And she mentioned bricks of all the other material. Now I'll continue quoting from her. The first ruler who built a wall around the city to defend it from strong looters was Gilgamesh, the famous Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk, at 2750 BC, exactly 1,000 years before Moses. Moses is 1450, this is 2750, so a little more than 1,000 years. Gilgamesh was an oppressive, cruel tyrant, she writes, whose people complained bitterly about his unscrupulous exploitation of them. So he took advantage first of his own people. He forced the peasants of the city and their young men to work in the field and build the wall. the society composed of many poor, spoiled peasants who work for the few privileged ones who took most of the agricultural product for themselves. This is Karen Armstrong's description. She continued, the rigid social hierarchy is symbolized by the ziggurat, the giant temple tower that reached the sky, where the worker remained locked at the bottom and the exalted aristocrats sit at the apex. Gilgamesh also commissioned an army to invade other cities for the loot. He died in such a raid. His religion supported the oppressive hierarchy, where a minor god walked in a field for the benefit of the superior god. That's what she writes. Gilgamesh's model of society was based on internal theft as well as external one. Wow, this is Karen Armstrong's words. I repeat, Gilgamesh's model of society was based on internal theft as well as external one. That's what we are saying. That moving now from the focus on bloodshed in Noah time and theft maybe on individual level to theft and organized theft in big term, internal and external. That's Karen Armstrong word without even being aware of the Bible. I continue quoting Karen Armstrong. Gilgamesh War is a good evidence for the wars between city-state for organized theft. From him homeward in history, raiding other cities became the only noble way to acquire scarce resources. War became a noble occupation of the aristocrat, justified by morality and religion. The quickest way to accumulate wealth was to invade other cities and nations, grab their territories, and abduct their people for manual hard work. Forced slavery was instituted. Karen Armstrong word. This is the generation after Noah. Forced slavery was instituted, organized theft. Now she continued writing, and I quote, an Aryan culture developed. And I quote, the Aryan discovered that the easiest way to replace lost animal was to steal cattle for a nearby village. The Aryans saw warfare superior to the tedious life in a city. Aryan religion gave supreme sanction to what was essentially organized violence and theft. Their mythology said that all cattle, the measure of wealth in their time, in those days, belong only to the Aryan, and that others have no right to those resources. Like Gilgamesh, the Aryans would always seek honor, glory, prestige, and fame in battle. The Aryan ritual and methodology glorified organized theft and violence. I quote from different lines in her book. Now, here Karen Armstrong gives us a good objective description of Abraham time, emphasizing repeatedly that society was based on a new passion to wreak empire and to conduct organized theft by armies and empires invading each other. Unlike Noah time, as we said, this theft is done on a large scale by armies rather than by small gang on individual homes like in Noah time. And in fact, this trend started by Gilgamesh continued to dominate human history, if you want, till WW2. And even today, we see it in Europe today, until the establishment of the United Nations. And we still see how big nations invade other nations just to control them. Then they think it's right to do it. So again, as we did when you read earlier Genesis chapter 1, we stood in awe how accurately Moses described the history of Earth, the whole evolution, that really match what we know from science, how accurately he does it in his time. Now we sit again in awe and see how Moses somehow describes so exactly accurately the essence of the generation between Noah and Abraham, and what was the Abraham society into which he was born. So let us now focus on Abraham. So when we read the Bible or the Torah, unlike any other book, we should be sure that what is written there is true. And if something is evading our finding, right, one day we'll find it. Everything is written there is as a signature of God. It's true, full truth. So let us now focus on Abraham himself. What was his special contribution above Noah to our faith? After all, he contributed something. So the key is Abraham discovered God on his own. He grew up in pagan home and discovered God on his own. And his faith actually evolved in several steps, which we are going to follow now. Step number 1, as an artist, the son of an artist, remember his father was an artist who made statues on his own, and Abraham helped him restore. So he was an artist, the son of an artist. He appreciated art and beauty. Abraham was fascinated by the beauty of nature, the Rabbi said. That was the first step he took. He was struck by the beauty of this blue sky, by the changing shape of the clouds, by the gorgeous lake, mountains, and trees, by the colorful flowers, and the beauty exhibited by animals all over Earth. It impressed him, the beauty of it. He was impressed, and that appreciation of beauty led Abraham to conclude that this world, this castle, as he called it, was surely created by a builder, architect, and artist who made it. Only a soul that appreciates art can say such things. He was impressed by the beauty of nature. We led him to conclude that that's not incidental. Whoever made it, that creator, it cannot come on their own to be to exhibit such beauty. Somebody has to carve them out. Somebody had to make them beauty, and that someone must be an artist himself, an architect. That's how we came to the conclusion that this castle had a builder, as the Rabbi said. Now we, in the 21st century, can simply, fully concur with such a sentiment. We too are struck by the beauty of planet Earth, watching it on our screen as seen from space. We too are fascinated seeing the thin blue atmosphere that's surrounding planet Earth. And we impress how so delicate, so fragile is this thin envelope. And it makes us realize how crucial it is for us to preserve that envelope of air, atmosphere, and keep it pure and clean and unpolluted, lest it is destroyed and disappear, leaving us to the mercy of cold space. So we too, like Abraham, are fascinated by the beauty of nature. We watch the cosmos by our telescope, and we are struck by the beauty of near and far away galaxies, swirling around black holes, moving away from each other in enormous speed, leaving behind them cosmic dust and shiny gas clouds, studded by myriad stars and remnant of exploded novas. And like Abraham, we too wonder, aren't we seeing the masterpiece of the creator architect? Moreover, while Abraham could see only the beauty of nature, he could not appreciate the wisdom in it. We in the 21st century can also see the fingerprint of the enormous wisdom of that creator architect. We see the wisdom of our creator architect in the information embedded in the DNA and RNA that we can find in even the most primitive cell, like in algae and bacteria. And like Abraham, we ask, isn't this a sign of the creator work? We realize how extraordinary it is that the dispersion of galaxies in space is made in such a way that it would promote life on this planet Earth. You know, it's not incidental that life developed on this planet only, and it's not seen in any galaxy around us. We are posted as if by design in a special place in the galaxy, in a special distance from our sun, in a place where life can develop. That's the new theory of science. Isn't it if a sign, fingerprint of the creator work? We realize that when we look at the evolution, that every step in evolution, we see the fingerprint of God. And the old Darwinian theory of progress by random mutation and natural adaptation has fallen apart, and it doesn't hold anymore. It cannot explain the evolution of species, and it cannot explain even the formation of one new protein. If you wait for one protein to develop at random by natural selection, it will take more time than billion times the universe age. It's impossible. It's not. You cannot explain developing one new protein, but just by chance, by amino acid getting together by chance. It is a fingerprint of the creator's wisdom. So the old Darwinism has failed to explain the evolution of even a single protein, not to say the appearance of new species. Many scientists, therefore, are now calling to put back the so-called God hypothesis into the study of nature. So that's understood. People now understand that there is a creator. You see his fingerprint in nature. But here, let's go back to Abraham. Abraham took one more step above all that, above the mere recognition. First, to recognize the creator. Then, as a son of an artist, he took a second step. And he said, he proclaimed, this wonderful creator, the artist, must own his artwork. He owns the world. Not only he created it, he owned it. How? By the virtue of being his maker. An artist has a right to own his art form. He learned it from his father. He sold the status he made in the shop by the right of the artisan to sell his art. He's owned it. He's the owner of those status. So the owner, if God built this, made it, if a painter, an architect, an artist made this world, he owned it. It came to him automatically. And that's new notion of owner. Nobody else ever said about God. Not Noah, not anyone else. So if I think we have maybe time a little bit. There is a funny story that as a kids we learned it in school, and it was funny. But the rabbi tell the story. It sounds funny, but in fact there is much more than just a funny story. Remember, we said that Abraham walked as a young man in his father's shop. One day he came to his father and he asked him, so the story goes, "Father, how come you sell those gods? Do you have a right to sell those gods? After all, those are deities that you made. How can you sell them?" So his father said, "Well, I am the maker of them, and I have the right to sell the statue, but the right of the artist to sell his artwork." So Abraham said, "Yeah, Father, if we have the right to sell them, do we have the right to destroy them?" So the father kind of raised his brow, but he said, "Yes, of course. We made him, then we can destroy them." Abraham listened, and one day when the father was out of the shop, he took a big stick and hit all the statues and broke them to pieces, apart from the big one. And then he left the stick in the hand of the big one. When his father came back and saw the devastation in the shop, he asked Abraham, "Tell me, what's going on here?" So Abraham said, "You see, in your absence, this mighty guy there on the corner with a stick in his hand, he stood up and he broke all the other pieces." So his father laughed and he said, "Well, I know what you did." So Abraham said, "Abba, Father, you told me that we make them and we have the right to destroy them." So here from that funny story that is it's a very popular story, but behind it lies the notion that led Abraham faith to believe in, to see God as the owner of the world, not just the creator. So Abraham then, after that, he took a third step of faith, and he said, "Well, if earth," he is now grown up, and he's saying, "If earth belongs to the creator, only he, the creator, may allocate land to the nation as it is discretion. You cannot invade other people's land and grab it as you wish. Everything belongs to God. He dictates the land. So organized theft by nation against nation is therefore a violation of God's ownership." That's what he proclaimed. Capturing people for forced slavery is therefore a crime against the creator ownership. That's what he was preaching. And as we can imagine, his new preaching put him in a direct confrontation with the ruler of the city. He was tried, and he and his brother Haran was sentenced to death by fire. Abraham's message is still very relevant to our time. where human trafficking control at least or involve 30 million people today around the globe are under the pose of a human trafficking, forced labor and slavery. So they are not sold anymore in market, in chain as in the past, but they are controlled. Slavery today is victim, mostly young females, are not sold by market in a chain, yet they are sold by their poor parents or captured by unscrupulous gangs who take advantage of the victim helplessness and ignorance. We see the human trafficking in sex shop, sweatshop, diamond field, child soldiers, forced agricultural work, and other demeaning human services. Slavery is very much with us today, despite 4,000 years of Abraham teaching. A shame. Now let's go back to Abraham. At age 58, Abraham met Noah, a pivotal time in his life. Noah was obsolete, but he heard about this guy, Abraham, there, and he came to visit him. And when he visited Abraham, he taught him, tradition says, he taught him the story of Genesis, the 7 commandments, and he taught him God names and the meaning as it appears in chapter 1, as we learn it, and the Garden of Eden, and the story of the flood. Abraham then combined his notion of God as the owner with Noah teaching of Yud-Heh-Vav-Keh and Elohim. And he combined the two things, his own input and Noah input, and he started referring to Hashem as, I quote to you, Hashem, the supreme El, who owns heaven and earth. Genesis 14:22. You meet Melchizedek there, and Abraham says, bless Hashem, the supreme El, who owns or purchases heaven and earth. Now, amazingly, the English translator is unaware of the issue, so politically right, instead of writing owns or purchase, you write possess. But it's in Hebrew, koneh, it's like kain. He purchased it. He owned it. The whole philosophy behind it. He owns the heaven and earth by the virtue of making it. He's an artist. He made it, so he owned it. He owned heaven and earth. Koneh shamayim va'aretz. That's the name that Abraham gave to God, combining it with what he learned from Noah. Later, I realized that this was not enough. That it's more important to recognize Hashem, God, not as the owner of heaven and earth, but as the owner of me, myself, personal life. After having so much trial and tribulation in his life, he referred to God as my new name, my master, my owner, Adonai. That's in Genesis 15:2. So this name, new name that Abraham coined to God, Adonai, my master, my personal owner, which means I'm a slave to him and not to anyone else. If I'm a slave to him, he is my only master. And whatever to my life, I accept it with submission. But that means I am not owned by anyone else. According to Abraham faith, which is Judaism, what we call slave in the Bible the Torah describes slave. Slave in the Bible as a rule of thumb, as the Talmud says many times, it's not like you buy somebody, you don't own the slave body. You only own his work. It's true for the Hebrew slave, certainly. You buy him for 6 years, but also for Canaanite slave. If you, God forbid, hit him and break his tooth, he's going out free. His body doesn't belong to you. And that's come from Abraham. Since I don't own even my body, the halacha is I cannot even, halachically, cannot even even donate my body to medical research, let's say. Leave a will. Because who are you to tell us what to do with your body? Your body belongs to God. So many halachic issues come from that notion of I am a slave to God. Only 3 people actually wanted by the Bible to be called slave to God is Abraham, Joshua, I think, and David. These are the only three people that the Torah text refer to them slave, honor to God. To be slave to God, it's an honorable thing. And it has replaced all other name in our prayer. So when we read the Torah in scroll in the synagogue, the reader there see YHVH or Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. He would not say Hashem, name, he would say Adonai. Adonai, A-O-I, Adonai replaces the Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. Not the name of Elohim. Elohim is remain Elohim. Elohim. If you read it Elohim, you can say it. But YHVH, it doesn't need, one can read it as letter by letter, but the tradition says we honor Abraham and we replace it by the new name Adonai, my master. A-O-I. So in the book, it's to remind the reader that you should read Adonai. So what the printer in the book put Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, but the vowels, which is in Hebrew under the letter and above the letter, it says A-O-I. Here come the error to read it as Jehovah. There's no such thing as Jehovah. Jehovah, if you read, you see, yes, you see Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, and the vowel is A-O-I. And you can read it Jehovah, but whoever read it Jehovah is not aware that the vowels is only there to remind you that here, don't say God's name, but say Adonai, A-O-I. That's so when you hear somebody talking about Jehovah, cringe, and be sure that the person doesn't know anything about the Bible. So the new name Adonai, which means my master, in submission. In fact, he's saying there, I know that I'm too old and I will have no children anymore. You promised me children, and I'm 100 years old. Sarah is 90 years old. I face reality. I know there is no chance for me to have a son, but you promised me. But I submit, Adonai, I submit to your verdict, whatever you say. That's the context. Submission. I submit, I call him Adonai. I submit to whatever you say. Moreover, he took even another step. To emphasize that he is slave to God, he circumcised himself. Circumcision, what is circumcision? The Rabbi said, the emblem of the master in our flesh. So by circumcision, taking upon himself to circumcise himself as a token for his slavehood opposite God, accept God as a master. This new commandment, which is now number 8, one above Noah, 7, is also done. No wonder that is done by the 8th day. 8th day, there are many other reasons, but one reason of the 8th day is because it is, after all, commandment number 8. By this, Abraham did not make himself separate from Noahide. He still saw himself a martyr for Noah. But he was dedicated. He saw his life dedicated to God faith and to spread the true faith of God, what he received from Noah. Abraham became the first martyr of Noah. When he and his brother Haran were thrown to the oven in the city of Ur means oven, Haran perished right away, but Abraham miraculously survived, but he was sentenced to exile. Let's now emphasize something about the new faith of Abraham, unique contribution in the name of Adonai, owner. The Rabbi actually made a statement that until Abraham, no other person has ever attributed ownership to any deity. Many people believe in many gods, deities, but nobody saw a deity is owning something. Because what's the purpose of attributing ownership to deity? Not the Egyptian, not the Babylonian, not the Greek. No one ever attributed ownership to the god. Let's say the Greek. Athens, the goddess of wisdom, she presented wisdom, but she didn't own wisdom. She is wisdom. Mars, the god of war, presented war. Not that he owned, he didn't own the war. It was just war. Poseidon, the god of the sea, was the sea, not the owner of the sea. So there was no ownership here. But Abraham, in his special passion, perceived God the first time as the owner of the world. And for him, it was a life-changing idea, causing him to reject slavery, reject theft, and cherish ownership. You see in his stories how he carefully purchased his money, pieces of land. All the stories about Abraham revolve around the abduction, slavery, and purchasing. Like Sarah, his wife, is abducted to Pharaoh. He get into fight with the nephew Lot because Lot stole water from other people, and so on. So everything is around stealing and righteous ownership. In fact, that's why the Talmud, probably 60% of the Talmud, is about right ownership. If I purchase a cow, and how much should I pay against this and this? What does that to do with religion? Somebody can ask. It is due to religion because of Abraham, right ownership. So Abraham now became, after going to exile, he became a Hebrew, a wanderer, and God directed him to the land, and I read it for you, that I shall give you and your children, because God is now the owner of land. He gave Abraham the land of Israel to reside only to the land of Israel, to your seed. And Hashem there says, I shall make you a great nation, and you will be blessed. I bless you and make your name good, and you shall be a blessing, and I shall bless those who bless you, and I shall curse those who curse you, and all the family of earth shall bless themselves by you. You know those verses. And Abraham, I want to spend few minutes about something very important. This blessing, Hashem blessed him so much, that brought Abraham to bless Hashem back for anything that we use. Abraham instituted the notion of blessing that we should, since God is the owner of things, we should bless him for anything that we use in his world. We bless him for our food, for our clothes, for enjoying anything in life, for good scenery, for hearing thunders, and the 100 sort of blessings. We bless him, and it gives us a message to our time. So before we use any natural source, before we destroy it, we should recall back a little bit and recall, wow, we are not the owner of this earth. Somebody else owns it. And we should give thanks for the merit for his allowing us to just have food. But we should not destroy his property. It's not our property, this planet, it's God's property. I think it's a wonderful message for our time. I think we stop here. Any question that we may have, next week we continue with, God willing, with Abraham and his passion for voyage, for mercy, and then maybe the bounding of Isaac. That's another facet of Abraham. Any questions so far, what we learned today?